You are listening to Changes Big and Small. This is Damianne, your host, as we explore what makes change exhilarating. Each episode, we'll meet one person who's found freedom by embracing change. This week, I'm speaking to another teacher, Emily Sliman. Although she's a teacher like Ryan from last week, their paths have been quite different. Emily did start out working as a software engineer before changing to be a pastry chef. She didn't find the passion that she was seeking there though, and instead, she found it as a high school math teacher. Along the way, Emily's lived in 8 countries. In that time, she's learned to embrace change and to say yes to new experiences. She also faced one of the biggest challenges of her life in the past few years. Join us to learn about Emily's journey. I hope that you will connect with her message and get inspiration to explore some of your own dreams. Let's get started. Today I'm talking to Emily. Emily, can you tell us where were you born, where you live now, and what do you do that pays the bills?
So I was born outside of Cleveland, Ohio. I was raised in Atlanta. I'm currently living outside of Tokyo, Japan, and I am a high school math teacher for fun and money.
Oh, that's nice. Fun and funny. So tell us, what do you believe about change?
Change appears to be scary for many people and hasn't really ever been scary for me. My belief in change is that it's necessary if you don't want to be stagnant in your life.
Would you please share with us what's the biggest change that you've made in your life?
I have made so many changes in my life that I'm not sure how to rank them in order of size. But I'm now living in my 8th different country, and so maybe moving has been the biggest changes, but I've also changed careers 3 times. So I think that has been big changes as well. And I think maybe the change in careers has been the biggest changes that I've made because it's sort of shifted my whole path. And maybe that's what led me to living in different countries.
What was that career change that you made?
Actually, it was at some point in university that I was studying to be a chemical engineer and decided that really my passion was cooking. And so I wanted to become a pastry chef. I told my parents and they were super supportive. And I think part of the lack of fear in change is that my dad sort of searched for his passion, and my dad changed careers a few times in my lifetime. And so they said, Emily, that's great. You can be whatever you want, but you should finish getting your degree in mathematics first. And so I did that, and I realized that I wasn't really ready to become a pastry chef. And so I worked as a software developer for a little bit to make some money so that I could quit and pursue my passion to become a pastry chef. In the end, I actually liked the software development that I was doing, but I had this goal to be a pastry chef. And so I stopped being a software engineer and went to culinary school because that was sort of how I perceived needing to do things, was that you needed to go to school first. And went to school, moved to San Francisco, worked as a pastry chef, and decided that it was not at all for me. And that I wasn't finding joy and wasn't finding passion in it. And also I wasn't finding money in it.
How long did you do it for?
About a year.
In what ways did it not meet your expectations?
So I think I expected to just have this creative outlet. And instead I was just making 500 cupcakes a day. And it was so monotonous. Occasionally I was given freedom to develop new flavor profiles or recipes, but really it was just, and it makes sense in retrospect. I should have figured that out. If you've got something that people like, that's what they expect you to make. So you have to just keep making that, even if you don't want to make that. And so, yeah, I stopped being a pastry chef and then sort of fell into teaching math and got really lucky that I love it.
You talk about falling into teaching math. What did that look like?
And I think that I learned pretty early on in being a pastry chef that I should have just gone and tried to be a pastry chef, and I should have gotten a job in a restaurant or a bakery rather than going to culinary school. Because in the end, I felt like I was paying the culinary school to work for them. And I didn't end up feeling like I had really learned all that much more than I would have learned had I just gone and gotten experience. So after I decided not to be a pastry chef, I didn't yet know I was going to be a math teacher. I didn't know what I was going to do. Through mutual friends, I learned about this opportunity to sort of go to Thailand for 6 months and do a workshop around sustainable living and sustainable farming. And so I went and did that. And while I was there, had dinner with another set of mutual friends. This friend was a teacher, a math teacher at an international school. And I was like, wait, you get to live abroad and you get to really know the country, and you're still getting to travel, and they're paying you a salary, and you get all this great vacation time. And my undergrad degree is in math. And so I was like, maybe I should try to become a math teacher so that I can live abroad also. And so I went back home to San Francisco, sort of figured out what I needed to do to teach internationally, which was I needed a valid teaching certificate and I needed some experience. And so I got a job on an emergency credential at a school in San Francisco. I enrolled in night school to get the credential because in this case, I knew that I did actually have to go to school so that I could meet the requirements to get the credential.
You talked about an emergency credential. What's that?
At the time in San Francisco, they were so desperate for math and science teachers that they would hire you even without your teaching certificate, under the caveat that you were working towards getting your teaching credential. It was incredibly hard, and I didn't have any classroom experience, and I missed out on the more traditional path that teachers tend to take, which is where they take their pedagogy classes and then they also get to shadow a more experienced teacher and have, almost an internship sort of model. And I didn't have that. I was just thrown into the fire, and I was teaching 5 different sections of different levels of algebra. And I got lucky that I had small class sizes, but I had no idea about classroom management and getting to know the students and how to best teach math. And so it was rough. And I had great mentors at the school that I was both working at and studying at night, but it was still, the first years of teaching, it's hard.
I'm thinking back about how prepared did I feel for my first teaching position. Sure, I did my teaching certification before and I had graduated and I did my practicums. So I had some experience, but I don't know that I really felt ready at all. In terms of discipline and classroom management, I don't know that anything that I had done had prepared me for that. Some people say that you should wait until Christmas before you smile to establish firm ground rules in your classroom. I think the more conventional wisdom now is that you should start building relationships with your students. But my practicums were not the best, I would say. For example, one of them, the teachers were on strike. They were on work to rule strike in Ontario. And so they were still teaching, but that's all they were doing. There were no after school activities, no extracurricular events. And you can imagine what the climate was in the staff room. Everybody was grumpy. Everybody was unhappy. I did not feel supported in my learning teaching journey. And in another practicum, I actually worked with a teacher that had taught me when I was in high school at a school that I had not gone to, but she had since moved schools. And she needed a break, let's say that, because she had no classroom management skills that I could discern. I remember thinking, I didn't know this teacher very well as a student, but she definitely needs a year off or something for her to recharge. You talked about some of your challenges in terms of not knowing the pedagogy or learning classroom management and those kinds of things. What kept you going at that time then?
In part because San Francisco was going through this change. There were so many teachers in my school that were in a similar situation to me. Basically, as a way to save money, the school district had I'm not sure what happened to the more experienced teachers, whether they changed districts or what, but there was a lot of us who were on emergency credentials, which meant our salaries were much lower than other teacher salaries, but it also meant that a bunch of us were in the same situation. And so I think we really supported each other through it. I had this great cohort that I was working with that was a place to vent, a place to learn new things. And the experienced teachers that were still at the school were there because they were really invested in the school and the neighborhood. I learned so much from them as well. I think most of the things that I had learned in my courses, it seemed that the idea of classroom management was like silent children sitting in desks with pencil to paper. And that was sort of what education should look like. And my view of education has changed so much since then. I expect my classrooms to be much louder now and engaged in math, I hope. But like you said, classroom management philosophy now, the core of it is building relationships. And so I value talking to my students about what they care about, which typically is not math, and finding out how I can make those connections with them and hopefully get them to not hate math.
And math is such a big one for that too, because people tend to have such strong opinions about math. I also studied math, and actually when I went to university, I thought that I was going to be a math teacher. Well, I did teach some math classes, but somewhere along the way, I ended up teaching computer science and being an IT integrationist much more than teaching math. But people would always say either, oh, I love math, or, oh, math, I'm afraid of math, or I don't understand math. And it's one of the subjects that people seem to be really polarized around.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the lessons that you've learned or the skills that you've developed as you've made changes in your life?
I think saying yes is one of the key skills that I've had to work on in myself, because by nature, I'm an introvert. I'm quite happy to stay at home by myself. If part of the reason that I've been moving to these different countries is to experience different cultures, then I need to leave the house. And so when, people post things to our off-topic chat at work, or people ask me to do stuff, I've been pushing myself to say yes at least once a week to get myself out of the house and to experience different things. In doing that, it leads me to enjoy the countries that I'm living in much more and to discover things that maybe I didn't know that I would like. And also to learn more about myself and reaffirm that there are some things I don't like. I know that I don't like big crowds and loud noise.
What are some of the things you've discovered that you did enjoy that you may not have necessarily tried, if not for your open-minded yes attitude?
Recently, I've been taking jazzercise classes, which I didn't even realize that jazzercise was still a thing. And that's not, you know me, that's not so unusual for me because I do enjoy group fitness classes and sort of dance fitness classes. But also when I was living in Bangkok, learning to say yes to sort of longer yoga workshops, for example. I signed up for quite a few 2.5-hour workshops. And I think in the past, I would have been afraid of doing some sort of exercise for that long. And one of them that I did was a handstand workshop. And, I was like, there's obviously no way that anyone can do 2.5 hours of handstands, but I was so curious about how they would sort of get us into it and build on the foundations of learning how to do handstands. And I was never a very good gymnast. I could do a cartwheel, but I've never been able to do handstands for very long. And also now that I'm older, like the idea of being upside down is scary as well. But that idea of sort of, yes, you can do it. Although I really think that rather than the moving abroad or the changing careers, I think that part comes from the surviving cancer and realizing that okay, it might be hard, but you can do it. And you're not ever going to do it if you don't try. And maybe you'll fall down, but it's going to be something that you'll survive.
Could you tell us a little bit about, you've been in remission for 2 years now, is it?
So I was diagnosed in March of 2016 with Hodgkin's lymphoma. And according to my doctor, you start counting remission basically from the time you're diagnosed.
Okay.
So 3.5 years almost. Yeah.
Actually, the way that I know Emily is that we both taught at the same school in Prague, in Czech Republic. And actually, Emily was my closest neighbor. And I was very sad when she decided to move from Prague to Bangkok, but have also enjoyed being able to visit her. So you had your cancer treatments in Bangkok, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that was the hardest thing you've been through?
Making the decision of where to have treatment was hard. Going through the chemo itself was not so hard at the beginning. I anticipated it being a lot harder, and then it did get hard, and it sucked. Sort of when I reached the halfway point in treatment, I remember thinking, like, once this is all over, if it comes back, I'm not doing chemo again. It's so awful that I don't want to have to go through this again. I don't want to feel like this again. But now that I'm on the other side of it, and knowing that it does end, and knowing that it ended with me being free of cancer, of course, if it came back, I would do it again.
How long did treatments take?
I had 6 months of chemo, and my chemo was every 2 weeks. So I had 12 treatments total. The treatments themselves were about, active time was 4 hours, but it would be a whole day spent at the hospital. And part of the reason that I chose to have my treatment in Bangkok, I think one, I was working in Bangkok at the time, and that's where my insurance was. And it just seemed easier to have the treatment in Thailand rather than figuring out the insurance process to have it done in the US. But also, I wanted to be in my house with my stuff, and I wanted to have access to easy massage and cheap food and sort of those comforts while I was going through treatment. But it was a hard decision to make of where to have treatment, because I know also that my family wanted me to be near them so that they could help out in the support. Mm-hmm. But then I was so lucky with my closest friends coming to Bangkok to help, and you were out for a few weeks, and it was so nice.
Yeah, and I feel like I saw you kind of at your high point. I think around the time when I visited, your chemo schedule had changed, and so you were not going through chemo when I was visiting after all. And we even got to do some Zumba, maybe at 25% Emily level, but still.
Yeah, and I think that was something that was really important to me as well, that I keep moving during chemo. And so I would try to take walks or get in the pool, and sometimes it would just be to like walk in the pool. And if I felt up to it at all, going to Zumba, even if I could just dance 1 or 2 songs, to be around people and to listen to the music and to feel like I was helping to flush the drugs through my body and out of my body, even if it was just mental, that part really was important to me. And I think that part really helped me to stay focused on feeling good even when I was feeling bad.
What would you say are some of your strengths that make you so adaptable?
I think being comfortable in my own skin. I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about who I am and who I want to be and what I prioritize. I first moved abroad to sort of see the world and travel a bunch. And I've noticed in the past few years that my travels have been to go see friends and to maintain connections. I think that comes from getting to know myself and realizing that this like sense of adventure is still there, but the need for community is greater. And being comfortable with myself and quite happy alone is always present, but then also being connected to something beyond just myself.
I can definitely relate to that. I can remember when I was in my 20s, I loved doing these ridiculous trips where I slept on the bus and I spent one day in places so that I could see all these things. It's not fair to call them ridiculous because I did enjoy them a lot, and I was intentional about those plans at the time. But now this has no appeal to me. Like I'd much rather hang out in a place for a few days and be with friends as well. What do you ask yourself when you're trying to decide if you should do something new or not?
I am a big organized list creator. So I definitely create lists of pros and cons. Certainly, like on my list, when I was thinking about leaving Prague, like leaving you behind was one of the hardest things, because I feel like our friendship is so great, and having a neighbor that was so close and having that sense of community. So when I think about moving, I create lists or moving and or making changes. But I'm still not sure like how to rank my lists or how to organize my lists. And so I make these lists, but in the end, I tend to just go with my gut feeling about whether it's time for me to make a change or to move on from a place. But you asked earlier about my strengths. And I think another strength that I have is that I'm going to be happy wherever you put me. And so this idea of one perfect spot or one perfect job, it's just not true. And so being happy with what I have and where I am, and knowing that if any of those things change, I can be happy with someplace else or working someplace else, and trying to remain present with wherever I am at the time.
That resonates so well with me, what you've just said, because definitely my impression of you is that you're happy and that you make the best of situations. And it's so interesting to me because, yes, I know you're an introvert, just like I am, but although we have so much in common, we're also very different people. Sometimes I watch you and I marvel because I'm like, she's just talking to everybody around her. And I do understand that introversion looks very different at different times. And you can even be a gregarious introvert, for example. And I'm not saying that's what you are, but I think one of the things that drives you is your curiosity as well. And you're much more open. And I learned from that. So thank you.
Well, and it's funny because you said that, your travels, like me, you've been wanting to go to a place and make connections, but I still feel like, every time I talk to you, you've got these plans to go to places that you haven't been before. And yes, maybe you go and stay a few days rather than just, 24 hours before going on to the next part. But I'm so inspired by you, how you continue to find different places to go and, people who will go there with you.
Well, that's the key. I find people who will go with me, whereas before I would have been maybe more comfortable doing it all by myself. So maybe that's one of the changes that I have seen over time. What changes still scare you?
I don't know. I feel like I am equipped to handle most things that are thrown at me. And I'm very lucky that if something happened with my job, I feel like I could find a different job. And if I move to a new place, I can find my people there or find the things I like to eat there. I think actually the thing that changes me the most is whether I am doing enough to make a difference in the world. And looking at the current climate in the US, am I prepared to live there again and to be an advocate and to be an ally and to help to bring about the change that I would like to see in the world? And I wonder if I am obvious enough about that with my students. I think those are the things that worry me or I'm afraid of.
When you say obvious about that with your students, do you mean like representing your true self or talking about the world? What? Tell me more.
No, I don't think representing my true self. I think that I am who I am, and I am definitely upfront about that. But I do think that sometimes I moderate my speech and moderate my beliefs to not make waves.
And why might that be?
I try to acknowledge that not everyone has the same beliefs I have. I don't want to offend my students. And I don't want, especially if I work so hard to build relationships, I don't want to isolate a student unintentionally.
Hmm.
I also don't want to isolate students intentionally. And especially, when I was younger, I think I was more rash in my thoughts. And so I work to be thoughtful with what I say, but maybe because I'm being thoughtful, I don't always say enough.
I think that's a hard balance to find as well, because the relationship is not an equal one when you're a teacher. Like, I always felt that I needed to be careful in how I say things and in what I say, because I didn't want to tread on family beliefs or on cultural beliefs. It's the whole idea of, is there universal truth? Or at least that's how I thought about it. And if there is my truth the universal truth? Whether it is or not, what right do I have to impose those beliefs on others? And I think that's always a juggling act.
And I think what you said about family beliefs and cultural beliefs, especially living in a culture outside of the one that I grew up in and not knowing all the nuances necessarily, I think that that's a big part of it. I don't know how all of my students have been raised. I don't know what their beliefs are religiously, culturally. And so maybe that has played into it as well. The conclusion that I've come to, and the way that I've been trying to bring about the change that I hope to see in the world, is I've distilled my class into 2 rules. Rule number 1 is to be kind. You should be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And then rule number 2 is more applicable to my classroom, which is to do math. So while you're in there trying to be focused on your learning. But I think, and I hope that rule number 1 of be kind is rule number 1 because it's the most important thing. Sometimes being kind means listening to someone else. And sometimes being kind means sharing your lunch. And sometimes being kind means being kind to yourself when you've had this impression that you're a bad mathematician forced upon you for your life, and trying to realize that no, some things are just hard and they take time. And it doesn't mean you're bad. It means that you haven't had enough exposure or practice, whatever.
What makes change hard for you?
I don't think change is hard for me. I think not changing is hard for me. So being comfortable with where I am and not looking for what's next. And I think that's why I've tried to develop more of a practice of slowing down and taking every day as it is, and to appreciate the weather, the culture, the food, whatever it is, to not always be looking for my next change.
Is there anyone that inspires you with change?
For sure, my dad and my mom. I'm not sure how excited my mom was to move across the country a few different times with my dad, but she did it and she made it work. And my dad, like watching him change careers and being willing to say, I don't know if this is going to work, but I want something different in my life and I want to make it happen. Like that was definitely what gave me the courage to say, I don't actually want to be a pastry chef. Like I thought that I did. I thought that's what I wanted to do. And rather than sticking with it and toughing it out, like, no, this is not making me happy. What can I do instead that is going to make me happy? And, I completely shifted to something wildly different and got really lucky that it made me happy. But I also feel that if at some point it's not making me happy, then okay, maybe I need to find the next thing that will make me happy.
Yeah, this is making me think of the whole idea of when you're downsizing or when you're cleaning up and you ask, does this bring me joy? And some people talk about that maybe joy is not the correct standard. And maybe it's not, or maybe it is, but you can decide what the standard is as well, right? Like maybe you're not going to hold each sock and say, does this bring me joy? But you might say, am I still going to wear this sock? Oh, so it's like, does this still fit me? Does this Do I feel right with this? Whatever the question is for you, find the question that will help you decide if it's time to make a change in your life.
Yeah.
To finish up, what advice do you have for someone who wants to make a change but are feeling a bit stuck?
Change is scary and can be scary, but not changing at all leads you to always be in the same place. Whether that place is an emotional place or a physical location. If what you're doing is making you happy and making the world a better place, then that's great. But if it's not, then why aren't you doing something about it? Whatever change you make, it's something that you can survive. Even if it's trying a new sort of exercise or looking at trying a new career, I think knowing that you will survive it is the key. One thing that I don't remember if I got it from you or if it was from, I know it was from doing exercise with someone. And it was basically like, just think about it in 10-second increments.
And that was me.
And I think maybe it was around doing planks or whatever, but it's like, can you do this for the next 10 seconds? And 10 seconds is probably the easiest time increment. It's the first thing people learn to do is they learn to count to 10. And so I think taking changes in 10-second increments and can I do this thing for the next 10 seconds? Can I survive it? And then you make it through those 10 seconds and you ask yourself, okay, can I do it again for another 10 seconds?
In generalizing this, it could be what's kind of the smallest time frame. And this connects back to math, right? Because when you've got a problem you don't know how to solve, you're like, what's the first smallest piece of this problem that I do know how to solve, that I do know how to do? And then once I get that done, I can see how it relates to the bigger whole.
Yeah. Or often when I give them a challenging problem and they look at it and they say, I have no idea where to start. Like, well, if you had to make a guess, like just start off with a guess. And I think that's the same thing with change. Like, what are you hoping to see? What do you want to see? And if that's what you want to see, what is a step that would have gotten you there? Can you take that step? Can you survive the 10 seconds of pain that it takes to get there?
For the final question, is there anything that I've missed or anything that you'd like to add before we finish up?
Well, I'm still thinking back about the question of like the previous question and how big changes aren't for everyone. And a change doesn't have to be career or location in the way that it's been with me. Change can just be going back to the Marie Kondoism of, does this bring you joy? I think looking at that, and like you said, not everything we do can bring us joy, but if everything in your life is not bringing you joy, what's one thing that you could do differently to help change that?
And that's an excellent place to end. Thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Always happy to chat with you.
You can connect with Emily on Twitter through her username Emily Sliman or on her blog emilysliman.com. You can see the spelling in the show notes. I would like to invite you to leave a comment on the show notes if you've enjoyed any of the episodes so far, or if you'd like to be a guest on Changes Big and Small. Let me know what your favorite question is, or if you have a question of your own and you could hear it in a future episode. I leave you with this. Go ahead. Take the smallest step that you can today to get closer to your dreams. Have a great day, everybody.